people have asked about some of the strangest people or the craziest stories or the craziest crimes that I heard in prison. And the first one is a guy who wanted to have sex with a tiger. So he had this whole thing planned out, and he had this whole description and justification. He said that it was a consensual relationship, that he was a zoosexual, and that it was a life choice, and that we had to respect it. And I, obviously, the animal rights activist, in me and all around, just not going to be okay with this. But he had this plan. He worked at an or big cat animal sanctuary in college, and he had this plan that he was going to get with a tiger. So he was gonna put on shoulder pads and a helmet, and he was gonna rig up a harness and figure out a way that the tiger couldn't kill him. But at the same time, he was telling me stories about how a tiger would take a 16-pound bowling ball and just swat it across the ground and send it 25 feet. And I'm thinking, this guy is literally insane. He's literally putting his life on the line. And I don't think he ever did it. But that shows there's a lack of mental stability, right? This is not a rational decision. This is not a reasonable thing. This guy really needs some help. And he was just one of many. We had the guy who worked in a funeral home who was having sex with the corpses. And it was weird because he was a kind of normal, good-looking guy, but apparently he was so damaged internally. He was so insecure. He was so unable to make social connection that the only way he could do that was to pretend to be with somebody by being with a dead body. I mean, this is horrendous. Can you imagine being the family or the friends or the whatever of this person that died? And you're thinking at least, okay, well, at least they're being treated with dignity or, whatever after their death. And then you find out this person's been having sex with corpses. That had to be just an ultimate violation. And I was amazed. He actually got a fair amount of time for that. I wasn't sure how that would work. But so we had these bizarre people with these bizarre stories, and you have guys that get in trouble. You have guys that have traumatic histories. And let me tell you, the guys who came up through the foster system and from abusive homes, I have never cried so much in my life. I've never felt so broken. But I tell you, it changed the way that I looked at people. Even some of the guys that the crimes they committed or the person that I saw, that kind of dangerous person, I had that judgment and I was oh, that's not a good person or that's not a... When I heard those stories about where they came from, when I understood what they had gone through, I could no longer judge or hate or even fear because to me, it was a broken person who was kind of spreading that pain to other people. And realizing that shifted my perspective because for the longest time, I, even in my idea of being, kind of reformed and open-minded, thought, okay, there's some people in prison that are good people who did bad things, and there's some people that are bad people. What I realized is there are some predators. There are some people who are just fundamentally different or sociopathic or psychopathic, and that we may not find a way forward with, but that the vast majority of people, even the ones with incredibly severe crimes, were just people who were hurt. They were hurt people who hurt people. And I don't know whether they can change. I don't know whether they're open to change. I don't know whether they can, develop the empathy that they're lacking or connect with that empathy to a wider group of people. But I think we need to try because the idea of throwing people away because they were so terribly treated and so abused and so molested, they ended up being attracted to tigers or they ended up thinking that a dead body was somehow an appropriate way of it showing intimacy or an expression of love. That's something that needs to heal, right? Whether we're going to keep them in prison for life or whether we're going to let them out, we need to be healing that because that is a fundamental failure on the part of a family or a society or whatever to not give people the help that they need. And people say, oh, well, the family should have done that. But again, when you're talking to a guy who was sexually assaulted by his father and then by his step-parent and then by his foster parent, it's really kind of hard to feel yeah, good job, family. We can trust them. Because so many of the people that are doing that are then having their own kids. So we have this expression of generational pain and this trauma that's inflicted on one that is passed to the other and passed to the next. And that was why what my dad said made a big difference to me. He said, you know what? My dad used to beat me and treat me like crap, and the only promise I can make you is that I'm not going to do that. And he never did. He never hit me once. And that was one of his huge things. That was his way of saying, I'm going to stop this generational pain. I'm not going to pass this on. And there are people that do that, and that is a huge thing. There are people who are traumatized who don't act out that pain toward other people, and who don't hurt and don't pass that pain on. And I think those are the people that are heroes that we don't recognize. And people just don't even understand the significance of somebody who is willing to deal with the pain and stop the passage of it. Or somebody who was able to say, and unfortunately, a lot of times it turns into self-inflicted. People then, kind of punish themselves and engage in acts of self-harm and continue to hurt themselves rather than hurting other people. But at least in that case, they're not passing it on to other people. And again, if we had a wider access to treatment and social workers and psychologists and trauma-informed care in schools or in a foster system that actually cared and had greater oversight, we could probably avoid a lot of these people going to prison in the first place, which would avoid creating more victims. It would avoid all the pain and all the cost and all the suffering that goes through this. And I think that's where we need to start. So when we talk about people in prison that have crazy stories, most of those crazy stories started in an abusive home, a home filled with drugs, a foster care system that is just fundamentally broken. And unfortunately, it's something that we see every day, but we don't see it, or we pretend we don't see it. We act like it's okay when it is not.